Oh yeah, you read the title correctly. Sonic Underground is a 1990s cartoon starring Sonic the Hedgehog that was aired in the year 1999. It was mostly conceived as a promotional for the now hit game Sonic Adventure, but despite that, there's surprisingly little tying it to the main series, making it kind of its own thing. So, after a poll which received a generous amount of votes, seriously guys, thanks for that, I decided to rewatch all 40 episodes of this now cancelled relic of Sonic's past. And boy, was I surprised by it. But before we continue, don't forget to like this video and subscribe with notifications on. I'm trying to reach 50 subs and I'd really appreciate if you guys subscribed. But anyways, back to the review. Now, to tell the truth, I went into this show almost completely blind since I haven't rewatched this thing in years. And admittedly my first re-impressions, so to speak, of the show were, let's just say, less than cheery. Now, I want to clarify that nothing in this video will have anything to do with the actors, writers, artists, and the rest of the team that made this show, so don't be blaming them for anything. And from what I heard, it's honestly a miracle that this show even gets as good as it does, so I'm just going to be focusing on the show in and of itself, and not going to be pointing fingers of who's to blame for this show's quality, especially when it comes to stuff like animation. Anyways, with all that out of the way, the first thing we gotta talk about is the overall story. So, the general premise in this show is that Sonic is the son of the rightful queen of Mobius, aka Sonic's planet, and he has two siblings that he was separated from at near infancy. The reason for their separation being that the Oracle of Delphius, aka this universe's prophet character, predicted that eventually Sonic's mom, Queen Alina, and the three kids, that being Sonic, Sonia, and Manic, would reunite at some point in the future to form something called the Council of Four, which would overthrow Dr. Robotnik, who of course is responsible for conquering Mobius and deposing the Queen, sending her into exile. Sonic was given to a middle-class family, his sister Sonia was given to a noblewoman, and Manic was supposed to be given to a lower-class family, but he was stolen as an infant by a band of thieves that decided to raise him. Oh, and at the age of 5, Sonic's parents were captured by Swap-Pots, aka Robotnik's soldiers, and were taken away to be roboticized, which in this universe is the functional equivalent of being sent to become a mindless slave. Also, Sonic was told to run away, and of course, being a kid, he didn't listen entirely and just ran back the second that he saw that his house was on fire. And since he got there after everybody left, he probably assumes that his original foster parents are now dead throughout the rest of the series. Yeah, this show has a really dark premise for a Sonic show. Anyways, Sonic was taken in by his Uncle Chuck, and he became a freedom fighter against Robotnik. And after taking out one of his factories, Sonic is visited by the Oracle, and he is made aware of Sonia and Manic, and the fact that he is a prince. He then meets up with his siblings, and his Uncle Chuck along with the other foster parents are captured and roboticized. And the three hedgehogs then become a team of freedom fighters known as the Sonic Underground. Get it? Because the title is... Okay, I'll stop now. Anyways, the rest of the story basically consists of the three hedgehogs' efforts to both A, thwart Robotnik's schemes, and B, find any clues as to the whereabouts of their mother. Spoiler alert! They don't find her. The show got cancelled before they could. Anyways, that about sums up the major overarching story for this show, and I have some critiques and praises. So, first off, there are several points in the show where Queen Alina could literally just join the hedgehogs and fulfill the prophecy. And I'm not just talking about like, oh hey, I'm in the general area, I could probably find them. No, I mean there are straight up instances where she saves them outright. Like, she gets involved and is literally a room's length away from the main characters, yet she doesn't interact with the triplet hedgehogs at all. And honestly, I'd be okay with this, if not for the fact that there are 40 episodes, and Queen Alina saves them in like one of the last 5 of the show. Like, honestly, what I don't get about this show is why they didn't have Queen Alina reunite with the kids as like part of the finale. I certainly wouldn't doubt that that was on the table in the writing room, but like I said, I'm not really going to point fingers, so all I'll say is that Queen Alina should have met up with her children at some point towards the end. Anyways, the next talking point I have is a particular part of Sonia's characterization that kind of just rubs me the wrong way, so to speak. During the first 15-ish episodes of the show, she's played up as this sort of bratty, pampered type character, and as annoying as I find that, that's not what I have an issue with in her. There's an episode, I'm pretty sure it's the resort-centered episode, where Sonia and Manic are arguing with Sonic that they are lost, and when Sonic doubles down, Sonia says, "Why can't guys ever admit when they are wrong?" And when Manic obviously questions her, since he was also on her side during this episode and this argument, she also just doubles down and more or less says "screw you too" to Manic, which I'm not one for political stances or anything when it comes to, of all things, Sonic the Hedgehog related content, but in the case of Sonia, I just find it so forced, especially given that she only acts like this toward the beginning of the series, and for the rest of the series she ends up being kinda kind-hearted and endearing, which I suppose could be interpreted as a character arc, but given how Sonia only really does this kind of thing like one other time to Manic specifically, where she more or less demeans him, I feel like this is just super shoehorned in for her character. Because honestly, I get that she's supposed to be played up as this super sassy, arrogant little rich girl in the beginning, but for me, it diminishes the value of some of her more endearing moments in these episodes specifically, since it's kind of hard to like her for at least the first 10 to 15 episodes of the show. She's just kind of annoying, and kind of mistreats Manic specifically, which I guess I get because he's the thief character, but at the same time too, poor Manic. But after that, she's much better, thankfully. Alright, and with the negatives of the story out of the way, let's now get into the positives. One of the things that I really like about this story is that they build out the world very realistically. The characters in this show actually raid for food and supplies, and they have to free prisoners and are actively looking for a way to de-roboticize people, which makes sense in the context of the show's world. I guess what I'm saying is that the show is good at world building, which is something that I kind of find lacking in Sonic Mania as of late. And also the characters tend to be pretty realistic with their plans and their reactions to getting captured as well. So that's also an area where the character writing tends to shine a bit. So basically what I'm saying is, they show it, they don't just tell it, which is much more than I can say for some more modern stuff like Forces, unfortunately. You know what you did, Forces. But anyways, now that we've gotten through the story segment, I think it's best that we focus on the characters now. For Sonic, there's not much to tell other than the main differences for this version of Sonic are that he has a known or unknown traumatic experience depending on whether or not he's told his siblings about it. He's actually a bit more street smart and mature than his siblings, having to often babysit Manic to make sure he isn't stealing stuff, and he's easily one of the more freedom fighter knowledgeable members of the bunch. But aside from that stuff, he still has his whole too cool for school attitude with a touch of his characterization for Sonic Adventure, given that he is a little more carefree in this show than in previous depictions. Again, not much has changed, it's what you'd expect from Sonic when he's written decently as a character. As for Sonia, we've already covered her more negative traits in my little semi-rant from earlier, so I'll just list the positive stuff and then move on to Manic. Sonia is a kind-hearted character who gets swept up in missing the luxury of her past often. That's the best way I can describe her, honestly. And she is pretty much one of the more interesting characters of the show. She also has a temper that can make for some pretty funny comedic moments when they play off of it just right. Then we have Manic, who is kind of always thinking of ways to raise money by stealing from someone or something. Thankfully though, as the show progresses, he loses this bad habit of his more and more, and shifts his focus toward helping the Resistance through more legitimate means. He's also really good with machinery, having been shown to basically be the tech guy of the group, even being able to list off some extensive diagnostics of their van in one episode. Then there's Bartleby, who is honestly basically your typical snooty rich aristocrat for most of the show, but he does get a bit of character depth and development toward the end of the show by being put on trial and saved by the Underground. Unfortunately, this happens at the end of the show, so the few times we see him before this, he is usually helping Robotnik and the other villains. Then of course we have Robotnik, who seems to be trying to be as intimidating as possible in this show, but seemingly coming across as more of a comical character 9 times out of 10. However, when Robotnik does succeed at being intimidating, it's usually because he's threatening his underlings. Those underlings being Sleet and Dingo, who are more or less the typical comic relief bad guys, all things considered. Dingo can basically be summed up as the stupid and to some degree innocent character, but not by much. He basically has very little going on for him outside of his weird crush on Sonia, which makes for some good laughs when Sonia puts him in his place, or at least it would if there were ever a situation outside of the first episode where Sonia actually put Dingo in his place. Sleet mostly steals Sonia's thunder there, and honestly I would say that he is one of the highlights of the show. Arguably he has more brains than Robotnik sometimes, and he is easily much more intimidating despite the show trying to downplay him as one of Robotnik's henchmen. He even manages to come up with some seriously well thought out plans during the series that actually work at times. So more or less, Sleek could be considered the most dangerous villain in this show. Next up we have Knuckles, who only makes an appearance in a grand total of 4 episodes of the show, but he has a slight character arc where he goes from initially distrusting the 3 hedgehogs and believing them to be thieves, to later betraying them in another 3-episode special where he believes that he can make a deal with Robotnik, to eventually realizing that the hedgehogs are his friends and that he made a terrible mistake by ever trusting Robotnik. Also, it's implied that him and Sonya may have something deeper than friendship going on, with Knuckles just being mostly oblivious because he's usually single-minded about his task. And honestly, I gotta give the creators of the show props when it comes to Knuckles' character here, because this is one of the more interesting interpretations of his character in Sonic media. Granted, he doesn't have much screen time, but still it's more than we can say for the main series, which seems to forget that he exists half the time. Anyways, next we have Cyrus, who basically serves as the Resistance character for the show. He gives the main trio most of their missions after he's introduced. That involves the stuff like stealing food that I was talking about earlier. And he's also pretty smart too, being able to create machines that are able to hack some of Robotnik's latest inventions almost instantaneously. However, the biggest problem with his character is that he's underutilized. He only appears in episodes that don't involve Queen Alina or stopping some of the road stuff that Robotnik plans, and just the hedgehogs happen to come across. And lastly, we have the Oracle and the Queen Alina, who are more or less combined the Obi-Wan Kenobi type characters for this series. They basically only serve to minorly advance the plot and to teach the hedgehogs some decently important lessons from time to time, and then not much else. And that pretty much covers all the characters in this series that are of note. The rest are characters that only play a role in single episode adventures, so they aren't really of major significance when looking at the show as a whole. That being said, the next thing we have to talk about is this show's gimmick, the musical numbers. Overall, I'd say that as a gimmick, it works pretty well when integrated with the main message or overarching problem in the episode. Admittedly though, the songs do vary in quality, with some being really catchy and good while others are just kind of annoying. But obviously this is subjective, so I'll let you be the judge of each individual song when it comes to this point in the video. However, the editing in these song segments is something that is not subjective when it comes to this show. I mean, seriously, these edits are terrible, and it's not an understatement. Some of these are so bad with the filters and stuff that they could probably give some people seizures depending on which musical number they are watching at the time. And some of the edited clips that they use are just random clips from different points in the episode or other points in the show, so it's kind of confusing just what's going on sometimes. But all that being said, the overall show still retains a pretty decent level of quality despite the honestly horribly edited music segments, and the characters sometimes swapping voices from time to time. And of course the sadly unfinished story, and taking into account the personal gripes I listed, which are probably different depending on the viewer. And the whole voice thing only happens 10 times at most in the overall show, and it only kind of happens in those blink and you'll miss it moments, so it's negotiable when watching the show. Overall, I'd easily give this show a solid 6 out of 10 when just looking at the show in a vacuum like this, as it's a pretty enjoyable and decent watch despite its many problems. But what do you guys think? Do you think Sonic Underground deserves a 6 out of 10 rating? Or do you think that it deserves a different rating given everything that I just went over? Leave a comment with your thoughts below. And as always, peace guys!